There are moments when following God feels less like walking on clear ground and more like standing inside heavy fog before sunrise. You pray, you wait, you try to stay faithful, yet life still feels uncertain, emotionally exhausting, and strangely difficult to read. And slowly, a dangerous thought begins forming somewhere deep inside your mind, without fully announcing itself at first. Maybe you are lost. Maybe God is distant. Maybe your confusion means you failed spiritually somewhere along the road and simply do not realize it yet. Many people secretly believe that following God should produce immediate clarity, emotional certainty, and visible progress all the time. But Scripture tells a far stranger story, filled with wandering deserts, unanswered questions, long waiting seasons, and painful inner transformation. Even faithful people often walked through confusion, while still moving in the right spiritual direction, beneath everything they could not understand. That matters deeply because confusion is not always proof of disobedience, and uncertainty is not always evidence of spiritual failure. Sometimes confusion appears precisely because old identities are collapsing while deeper trust is slowly being formed underneath your visible life. And the hardest part is that transformation rarely feels dramatic while it is happening, especially during emotionally exhausting seasons. Most people expect God to guide them through constant emotional highs, but often He guides through quieter and less visible changes instead. Changes in desire, changes in perspective, changes in what no longer satisfies your soul the way it once did before your heart began awakening spiritually. One sign you are still following God is that sin no longer feels comfortable even when temptation still feels painfully real sometimes. You may still struggle, still fail, still repeat unhealthy patterns occasionally, but something inside refuses complete peace with darkness anymore. That inner tension matters because spiritually numb people rarely wrestle deeply with the condition of their hearts before God, honestly. The struggle itself can become evidence that your conscience is alive rather than abandoned entirely to emotional indifference and spiritual distance. Another sign appears when worldly success begins losing some of its power to fully satisfy your deeper emotional hunger within. You still work, still dream, still pursue goals, but accomplishments no longer feel capable of healing your soul completely anymore. There is now a strange ache beneath achievement, a quiet awareness that external success cannot resolve internal emptiness by itself. Many people mistake that ache for depression or failure, when actually it may reflect spiritual awakening, beginning somewhere deeper inside. God often disrupts false sources of identity before revealing deeper forms of peace, purpose, and spiritual belonging through relationship with Him. And during that disruption, life can feel confusing because old motivations stop working, while new clarity has not fully arrived yet. Another sign is that you keep returning to God, despite disappointment, weakness, confusion, or emotionally painful seasons that test your faith repeatedly. People who are spiritually dead usually drift away permanently, but spiritually hungry people continue searching even through exhaustion and doubt. Sometimes your prayers feel weak. Sometimes your faith feels fragile. Sometimes you wonder whether anyone is listening, while you sit alone, carrying fears too heavy to explain clearly. Yet somehow, you still return. You still seek. You still hope quietly beneath the confusion, even when certainty feels emotionally impossible to hold on to consistently anymore. That persistence matters more than you realize, because hunger for God often survives long before emotional clarity finally returns again. Another sign appears when your heart becomes softer toward other wounded people instead of more harsh, cynical, or emotionally superior over time. Pain can harden people deeply, yet people walking with God slowly develop unusual compassion through the very struggles nearly breaking them apart. You begin noticing hidden loneliness inside others because you recognize loneliness inside yourself now with greater honesty and tenderness. You judge less quickly. You listen more carefully. You realize everyone is fighting battles invisible from the outside of ordinary daily life and public appearances. That shift often grows slowly through suffering, because suffering exposes how fragile human beings actually are beneath their carefully managed identities. Another sign is that you feel increasingly uncomfortable pretending to be someone you are not, emotionally or spiritually anymore. Masks become heavier. Performances become exhausting. You grow tired of shallow conversations and versions of yourself created mainly for approval or emotional self-protection. At first, this feels disorienting because old social patterns no longer fit comfortably, while authentic vulnerability still feels frightening and unfamiliar. But God often leads people through seasons where false identities begin collapsing before deeper healing and authenticity can fully emerge. This process rarely feels peaceful initially because honesty disrupts the emotional structures people spent years building for survival and acceptance. Another sign is that you are becoming more aware of your need for grace rather than more impressed with your spiritual performance constantly. Many people assume spiritual maturity produces prideful certainty, but genuine closeness to God usually produces deeper humility and honesty instead. You begin seeing your own weakness more clearly, not with hopeless self-hatred, but with sober awareness and growing dependence on divine mercy. That awareness changes relationships because humble people stop needing to appear superior, emotionally invulnerable, or spiritually impressive all the time. They apologize more sincerely. They defend themselves less aggressively. They become safer people because insecurity loses some of its controlling power gradually over time. Another sign appears when you experience peace in strange moments that logically should only produce fear, panic, or emotional collapse completely. Not constant peace, not perfect calm, but unexpected moments where something deeper than circumstances quietly steadies your soul from within, despite visible uncertainty around you. Maybe during grief, maybe during financial pressure, maybe during loneliness, heartbreak, or a season where answers refuse to arrive as quickly as you hoped, desperately. And still there are moments where you somehow continue breathing without completely falling apart emotionally beneath the weight you carry daily. That quiet endurance may not look impressive externally, but spiritually, it often reflects God sustaining people beneath the surface invisibly. Many believers expect miracles to appear dramatically while overlooking the miracle of surviving difficult seasons without losing their soul entirely. Another sign is that truth has become more important to you than comfort, even though truth often disrupts emotional stability at first. God leads people into truth gradually because truth exposes illusions people once depended on emotionally for identity, security, or personal control. Sometimes he reveals unhealthy relationships. Sometimes hidden pride. Sometimes fear disguised as wisdom, or people-pleasing disguised as love and spiritual kindness. Those revelations hurt because illusions usually feel safer than reality before healing fully begins unfolding through honesty and surrender slowly. Yet spiritually alive people continue moving toward truth despite discomfort, because something deeper now values freedom more than emotional avoidance. Another sign is that your relationship with time slowly begins changing in ways difficult to explain clearly to other people around you. You stop needing every season to make immediate sense. You stop demanding instant answers from God before taking another faithful step forward through uncertainty and emotional tension. Waiting still hurts. Delays still confuse you. But somewhere inside, panic begins losing some of its authority over your thoughts and emotional reactions gradually. You start understanding that spiritual growth often unfolds slower than human ambition feels comfortable allowing or emotionally accepting. Seeds remain invisible underground long before visible fruit appears above the surface, where others can finally recognize growth happening. God often works similarly within the human soul, developing depth privately before revealing transformation publicly through daily life and relationships. And another sign appears when worldly distractions lose some of their power to completely numb your deeper spiritual hunger anymore. Things that once consumed your attention endlessly now feel strangely hollow after enough time spent seeking deeper meaning and inner peace. You still enjoy life. You still laugh. You still participate in ordinary human experiences and responsibilities like everyone else around you each passing day. But your soul now recognizes the difference between temporary distraction and lasting nourishment in ways it once could not understand clearly. That awareness can feel lonely because many people build entire lives around avoiding deeper questions about meaning, mortality, and spiritual purpose. Yet, once your heart awakens spiritually, endless distraction no longer satisfies the same way it once satisfied your emotional emptiness before. Another sign is that obedience becomes less about fear of punishment and more about protecting connection with God and inner peace. Mature faith slowly moves beyond transactional spirituality, where people obey mainly to secure blessings or avoid divine disappointment constantly. Instead, love begins reshaping desire itself. You avoid certain paths not merely because they are forbidden, but because they damage your soul and spiritual clarity deeply. That shift changes everything, because externally identical behavior can emerge from completely different internal motivations and emotional realities. Fear-based obedience creates exhaustion eventually. Love-based obedience creates intimacy, trust, and deeper alignment with the life your soul truly longs for within. Another sign appears when you become increasingly sensitive to the condition of your inner life, rather than merely your outward image publicly. You notice resentment faster. You recognize pride sooner. You feel conviction when dishonesty enters your words, attitudes, or relationships, even in socially acceptable forms. That sensitivity may feel uncomfortable initially because awareness exposes hidden places needing healing, surrender, and emotional honesty before God. But spiritually alive hearts remain teachable. They remain open. They remain willing to confront uncomfortable truth instead of protecting illusions through endless defensiveness and emotional avoidance. Another sign is that your definition of strength slowly begins changing through your experiences with God during difficult and uncertain seasons. At one time, you thought strength meant never struggling, never doubting, never crying, and never feeling emotionally overwhelmed by life. But now, you begin understanding that true spiritual strength often looks quieter and far more humble than outward confidence suggests. It looks like remaining kind after disappointment. It looks like staying honest after failure. It looks like continuing to love people even after being wounded, misunderstood, or emotionally exhausted repeatedly over many years. That kind of strength cannot be manufactured through performance because it grows slowly through surrender, healing, and dependence on God. And perhaps one of the deepest signs is that you are learning to sit with unanswered questions without immediately abandoning your faith entirely. This is difficult because modern culture trains people to expect instant explanations, instant solutions, and immediate emotional resolution constantly. But spiritual maturity often involves remaining faithful inside mysteries the human mind cannot completely resolve or control perfectly. There are prayers that seem delayed. There are losses that remain painful. There are seasons where heaven feels silent, despite your sincere searching and emotional vulnerability before God daily. Yet even there, something inside keeps whispering that silence does not automatically mean absence or abandonment forever. You begin realizing that faith is not certainty about every outcome, but trust in God's character despite uncertain outcomes around you. That realization changes the emotional atmosphere of your life slowly because fear no longer controls every unknown possibility ahead completely. Another sign appears when comparison begins losing some of its power over your identity and emotional peace throughout ordinary daily life. You stop measuring your spiritual worth entirely through other people's visible success, confidence, or public appearance of blessing and stability. You realize many outwardly successful people still carry invisible loneliness, fear, confusion, and exhaustion hidden beneath polished lives externally. And you realize God works differently with every human soul, because every person carries different wounds, lessons, and spiritual journeys through life. That understanding creates freedom. You stop rushing your growth constantly. You stop despising your process. You stop believing slower seasons automatically mean God forgot you somewhere along the difficult road ahead entirely. Instead, you begin noticing small transformations that once seemed insignificant but actually reveal deep spiritual movement underneath your visible circumstances. The way you react differently now. The way you recover from failure faster. The way bitterness no longer satisfies your heart the way it once secretly did during painful emotional seasons before. These small shifts matter because God often changes people gradually enough that they only recognize transformation after looking backward later. Another sign is that loneliness no longer automatically pushes you toward distraction the way it once did earlier in your life. You still feel lonely sometimes. You still ache for connection. You still experience nights where silence feels heavier than you know how to explain to other people honestly. But now, loneliness occasionally becomes a doorway into deeper prayer, reflection, honesty, and awareness of your need for God's presence. Before, silence terrified you because silence exposed hidden fears, waiting underneath constant activity and emotional noise each passing day. Now, even though silence remains uncomfortable sometimes, you begin noticing moments where God meets you quietly inside that stillness. And perhaps that is one of the clearest signs of all. Your soul is becoming less addicted to noise, less dependent on distraction, less desperate to escape every uncomfortable emotion immediately before understanding what those emotions are trying to reveal within you. That process changes relationships too, because healed people stop expecting others to rescue them from every form of inner emptiness constantly. Instead, they begin loving more freely. Not perfectly, not without fear, but with greater emotional honesty and less hidden desperation, controlling every interaction beneath the surface silently. Another sign appears when suffering begins producing depth inside you, instead of only resentment, bitterness, or emotional numbness over time. This does not mean pain becomes enjoyable. It does not mean grief disappears. It does not mean betrayal suddenly feels easy or emotionally insignificant to carry through ordinary daily life. But suffering slowly softens your illusions. It humbles your ego. It teaches you how fragile people really are beneath their carefully managed appearances and social performances. And through that awareness, compassion grows, patience grows, mercy grows. You stop needing to judge everyone quickly because you understand how complicated healing and human struggle actually are now. People walking with God often become gentler over time, not because life treated them gently, but because God met them within suffering personally. And finally, one of the clearest signs you are following God is that you are changing slowly in ways impossible to fake sustainably. Not becoming perfect, not becoming emotionally untouchable, not becoming endlessly productive, confident, or spiritually polished before everyone around your visible life externally, but becoming more honest, more aware, more compassionate, more willing to surrender control when control no longer brings peace to your exhausted heart anymore. The transformation may feel painfully slow because God often works beneath visible emotions, long before external clarity fully appears within your life. Seeds grow underground before anyone sees movement above the surface, and spiritual growth often follows the same hidden pattern quietly. That means confusion does not always indicate absence. Sometimes confusion means roots are growing deeper than your current understanding can fully recognize or explain yet. The hardest seasons often produce the deepest spiritual formation because they strip away illusions of self-sufficiency and emotional control, eventually. You discover what truly sustains you when comfort disappears. You discover what truly matters when distractions stop numbing the deeper questions inside your soul at night alone. And you discover whether your faith depended mainly on blessings or whether it can survive through mystery, silence, and painful uncertainty too. Many people leave difficult seasons believing God abandoned them, only later realizing those seasons changed them more profoundly than easier years ever did. Because confusion has a strange way of exposing hidden idols people trusted more than they trusted God himself, emotionally and spiritually. Control, certainty, approval, comfort, predictability. When those things begin shaking, deeper fears rise toward the surface, where healing can finally begin honestly instead of remaining hidden forever. And perhaps that is why some of the strongest believers often speak with unusual gentleness rather than arrogant spiritual confidence towards struggling people. They remember confusion personally. They remember unanswered prayers. They remember nights where faith felt more like endurance than victory, or emotional inspiration and certainty. And somehow, God remained present through all of it, even when his presence felt difficult to recognize clearly in the moment. That truth matters because many people are quietly condemning themselves for seasons God may actually be using to transform them deeply. You think you are failing because life feels unclear. But sometimes clarity disappears temporarily, so deeper trust can finally grow beyond emotional dependence on visible outcomes and easy answers. Anyone can feel faithful when every prayer receives immediate answers and every path ahead looks bright and emotionally reassuring. But trust becomes real when people continue walking honestly through uncertainty without fully understanding where the road is leading them yet. That kind of faith often looks weak externally because it trembles, questions, waits, and occasionally cries from emotional exhaustion and confusion. Yet trembling faith still moves forward. Questioning faith still seeks God. Exhausted faith still whispers prayers into silence, hoping heaven somehow still hears everything hidden within the human heart. And maybe that is more beautiful to God than the polished certainty people often try performing publicly before others and themselves. Because real faith is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like surviving another difficult day without surrendering completely to bitterness, numbness, or despair, despite overwhelming pressure. Sometimes it looks like choosing honesty over appearances. Sometimes it looks like resting instead of controlling every possible outcome through fear and emotional overthinking constantly. Sometimes it looks like quietly believing God still sees you, even when your own life feels impossible to fully understand anymore. So, if life feels confusing right now, do not assume confusion automatically means distance from God or spiritual abandonment completely. Look deeper. Notice the quieter signs. Notice what is changing inside your heart, beneath the uncertainty and emotional tension surrounding your current season, right now. Maybe you are more compassionate than before. Maybe you crave truth more deeply. Maybe your soul no longer feels satisfied by distractions that once controlled your attention constantly, every single day. Maybe you are learning surrender slowly after years spent trying desperately to control everything through fear and emotional exhaustion. Maybe God is closer than you realize, precisely in the places where your old certainty is finally breaking apart completely. Because sometimes the clearest evidence of spiritual growth is not visible success, but a transformed heart, surviving confusion without losing hope entirely. And maybe tonight, while you question whether you are truly following God at all anymore, heaven sees something different completely. Not failure, not abandonment, but a tired soul still turning toward the light, even while walking through fog too thick to fully understand yet.